governance is going to be ever more important in the next 10, 20 years, indeed the next century, we feel the more we learn about how global governance in the economic and social arena has worked in the last 50, 60 years, or not worked, we're laying the foundation for thinking about how it should work better in the years ahead. So with that, let me move quickly to the PowerPoint. We decided that we couldn't write a history of everything, so we concentrated on the ideas that came out of the UN. These are not ideas just in an abstract conceptual sense. They're ideas with values, they're ideas in relation to operations that countries or the international community should take. And on the back of the book, one of the former advisors to the Secretary General said, "How many battalions has the UN got?" He was echoing a question that was put many years ago in relation to the Pope of the Catholic Church. And he went on, the advisor to the Secretary General, saying the power of ideas must not be underestimated, and perhaps it's been ideas which are the big battalions of the UN. And you'll see when we reach the end of the project our conclusion of this. Another common saying you may have heard, there's nothing so powerful as an idea whose time has come. And we feel that the power and brilliance of the UN is often that it is come up with ideas before their time has come, but stuck with the ideas long enough to see public opinion, political opinion change, so that the ideas which were often ahead of their time have become influential in their time. I'm not going to take you through all the 17 volumes. You've seen it. I'm just emphasizing here that there was an international advisory council. It's not merely that we've had 22 authors working on the books, of which Roger Normand has been one, writing the book on human rights, but we've had an international advisory council. We've had funding from governments, funding from foundations, but all the funding provided on the basis that this is an independent project. It is not part of the UN, nor have we been beholden to any particular government. It's been intellectually and academically independent. We've not only focused on the role of ideas, we focused on the key role of people. And as part of the project, we interviewed 79 people who'd held senior positions within the UN. Sometimes the interviews were an hour and a half, which is all that Kofi Annan could spare. Sometimes they went for 10 to 12 hours. They were all prepared in depth, looking at the roles that the people had performed, looking at things they'd written, and this is a selection of the people that we interviewed, and on the website you will find the full list of the interviews. We also, for those of you who want to see the detailed interviews, we have a CD-ROM which is available on request, which gives a fully indexed and easy, user-friendly access to the interviews in words. It's a remarkable source, and we found it was not only important to understand what the people did, the 79 key people did during their time in the UN, But what were their early experiences in their youth, their education, that often gave them the international commitments that were so important? So that is all the background. You'll find more on www.unhistory.org. So what were the 9 ideas that changed the world? We had a lot of debate, trying to distill from the projects, the books, the interviews, which were the key ideas. I haven't got time to elaborate many of them. I'm just going to mention them and a few dimensions of each of them. Human rights for all. And in a bit, Roger will say more. But when the UN was founded in 1945, the idea of human rights for every person in the world was truly revolutionary. Remember colonization, remember the war, remember the fact that many Americans could not vote at the time. Remember that the Soviet Union, another great power setting up the UN, had its gulags. The British, if I may speak, had its colonies. It was brilliant that human rights for all became one of the great ideas. And that you ask, of course there were other origins of the idea of human rights. Indeed, human rights for all, going back to the French Revolution philosophers. But it was the UN that gave this idea and these other ideas leadership and legitimacy. Gender equality and women's rights. I'll come back to that in a moment. Development goals, the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals of the present. But they weren't the start. In 1960, the UN started coming up with development goals, originally UNESCO, goals for the expansion of primary and secondary and tertiary level education, region by region. There was an Asian conference, there was an African conference, there was a Latin American conference. Fairer international economic relations, not just free trade, but fairer trade. In a moment, Louis Emery is going to say some points about that. Strategies for accelerating development in poorer countries. The success of Asia may be such that you almost forget when that was a fundamental challenge in Asia. And some of the early writings, not fortunately in the UN, but for example in the University of Oxford, the distinguished professor, if I call him that, of colonial history, said, why does the UN imagine that in India